Today's webinar is Water Conservation in Multifamily Buildings. Build It Green is presenting this webinar on behalf of the Energy Network, which is a local government organization created by the California Public Utility Commission that provides resources and assistance to homeowners, businesses, and public agencies planning energy efficiency upgrades serving the California region, Southern California region. These services include community education and outreach, such as this webinar, rebate and incentive offerings, attractive financing terms, which is actually a webinar we'll be hosting on August 20th, and tools to help identify contractors that have been trained in energy efficiency. Additional resources help homeowners take the next steps towards saving energy. The Energy Network actually has a great program for multifamily property owners, and we'll tell you a little bit more about that towards the end of our webinar. So any property owners in the audience, please look out for that information. With dire drought conditions continuing in California, more and more thought is being given to water conservation in buildings and rehabilitating multifamily buildings. Eden Housing is one of the first nonprofit affordable housing owners in the country to look comprehensively at its existing portfolio of properties from an energy efficiency and green practices perspective. This webinar will delve into water conservation approaches, including considering drought-tolerant plant species, resident and staff education, gray water use, and retrofitting existing irrigation and plumbing fixtures. You can find more information about this at Eden's website featuring the Green Initiative, which is www.edenhousing.org/page/green-initiative. Today's presenters are going to be Kevin, Mary, and Alejandro of Eden Housing, so please join me in welcoming our presenters today.
Great, thank you, Leela. All right. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for what we are calling a webinar conversation around water conservation. Just want to say thank you to our host, Build It Green, who will let us know if there are any technical problems for what you're seeing today. My name is Nathan Helen, the Policy and Communications Manager for Eden Housing, and I will start us off with the introduction of our esteemed panelists. Eden Housing and the topic in which we are all interested and cannot escape, California's drought and water conservation. We'll be hearing first from the panelists in the room from Kevin Leitner, who is our Associate Director of Real Estate Development, Mary Lucera Dorst, our Associate Director of Asset Management, and Alejandro Oropeza, our Facilities Manager. So just a little bit about who we are. Eden Housing is one of the most productive and successful nonprofit affordable housing developers in California. To date, Eden has developed or acquired nearly 8,000 affordable apartments in more than 130 properties throughout California. We provide homes for more than 17,000 low-income families, seniors, and persons with disabilities. As you can see from the map, we are based in the San Francisco Bay Area, but have properties as far north as Healdsburg, and we now have 2 new properties as far south as San Ysidro. Eden is one of California's oldest nonprofit affordable housing developers, starting in 1968 with a few homes in Hayward, California in the Bay Area, to extend the reach of our mission to build and maintain high-quality, well-managed, service-enhanced affordable housing communities that meet all the needs of our residents. So why are we here today? Why are we talking about this? Why does this drought, above all the other droughts that happened in the past, matter? This is some resources from SaveOurWater.org. They're a water conservation resource here in California. And the greatest fact is that the past 4 years are the driest ever in California's recorded history, and we don't know when it's going to end. We could spend the whole webinar showing pictures such as these. This is Folsom Lake. It's this past January. You see a hiker, and this is what's left of the lake. I have family up north in Oroville, which is just north of Sacramento. They don't have a houseboat, but they've seen this theme as the water is declining. You can see where it used to be and how many more houseboats used to be able to be on Oroville Lake. This is becoming the new normal as all of us in our own communities are struggling with water conservation. We're letting our grass go brown. Brown is the new beautiful, or brown is the new green, from what we're hearing around. There are subsidies and funds from your local jurisdictions that vary by city for private owners of homes to let their grass go brown. Californians are already conserving water. Since the last big drought in the 1970s, water consumption has remained even, and it has actually decreased as population has increased. So if you think about water conservation, it is that much more dire because we have already been conserving since the last big drought. Our practices have changed. We are more drought understanding. We have understanding of the drought and what it means to save water. This means that the goalposts have moved that much more as water consumption has not gone up that much from where it was. This is one of the biggest stats that help us understand and put into context of what's going on. This past January was one of the driest months on record. Couple that with the past 4 years of the most dry 4 years we've had. And this is the scariest stat. In March, snowpack is at average of 5%. Now, the majority of our water, when we look at lakes like Folsom Lake and Oroville Lake and other reservoirs around the state, that is very apparent, but those are fed by the snowpack. And so it's not snowing up in Sierras, and therefore California will not be getting water in the very near future, if not for the next 2 to 3 years. You might have remembered this picture of Governor Brown in Phillips, California. Typically, this area is covered at this time, which was in April, by the snowpack about 5 to 6 feet. So I'm not exactly sure how tall Governor Brown is, but you can imagine he is fairly tall, so he would be covered mostly with snow. So this really led to a state of emergency that some of you may have been registered for the last webinar, that we thought we would be doing this in May, and the governor came out with new policies, executive order at the beginning of April that were approved in May, that kind of, again, moved the goalposts of what we should be doing. Essentially, this is saying that all cities in California will be cutting back water use by 25%. Now, you'll remember that we're already cutting back, so this 25% has to be put in that relation, in that context, as we think about as we're going forward with this. So Save the Water says that conservation is the cheapest, most reliable, quickest way to stretch supplies. So as we think about how to survive this drought and any future droughts that we might have going forward, that conservation is the key. What the governor said is that by 2016, remember he said this in May, so much of 2015 was already gone. So in a span of 7 to 8 months, he was saying that California cities must cut back by 25%, and for some cities it would be as high as 35 to 36%. That was based off of how much cities had been saving already. So if a city had been doing pretty good for the past few years of cutting back their water consumption, then their savings threshold would be lower. We're based here in Hayward, California. Hayward has been doing a fairly good, relative job of saving water, and our threshold savings goal is only 8%. So that's much lower versus some of the other water districts. And I'll be showing a slide later. The Coachella Valley is required to cut back by 36%, and that's based off the fact that they have not been saving very well for the past 2 years. So water districts will be held accountable by the State Water Resources Control Board, and they will be held accountable by fines of up to $10,000 a day. Now, there isn't a lot of strict language around this. At this point in the savings game, the Water Resources Control Board wants to see that jurisdictions are trying, that they're making good efforts and good faith efforts to conservation. What can the districts do to help water users such as us cut back so that they are not hit with fines So water districts can fine individual residents $500 per day for overusage. But it's not just about fines, but it's more about education. So what can private homeowners, what can multifamily building owners do to help cut back? And the water districts have provided great resources on how to do it. Some fines are even refundable. So if you get a fine this year, if you can show that you took that to heart and that you will be saving water over the next couple of years, that they will actually refund that fine. So it's not about generating fines, it's about saving water. This is an interesting study from the city of Fresno. Fresno implemented both a fine and education system. They actually they were the most finer. They charged the most fines of the residents over the past year than any other city. But they also embarked on an education campaign. So they wanted to see would a notice like this be as effective as a notice like this. So this black and white image is more like a jury summons. It's very official. It technically has the same information as the cartoony version that sometimes we see cities leaning towards. But they found that more residents actually reached out to the city for more information about how to save water with this more official jury summons type notice. So that's a very small study, but I thought that was just some information we wanted to share with you. And lastly, before I hand it off to our esteemed panel, I wanted to show you how the water districts and how the state is going about tracking. So they're actually doing it by month. They're looking at water consumption and coming out with reports that look at, I forgot how many water districts there are. I think there's upwards of 300 water districts. How they should be saving. So if you look at the third column, there that says conservation standards. So for the first row, you see Coachella Valley. The third column says 36%. That's their conservation standard. In the month of July, in the first column, you'll see they had a savings of 21%, which is not bad, when you think about where they were. But in regards to their standard, they missed it by 15%, which is that fourth column there. And then the second to last column looks at the gallons of volume that represents. So because they missed their conservation standard by 15%, that equates to 461 million gallons of water. And so this is just one example. This is the first page of that report, page 1 of 14, and it's sorted by the water districts that need the most improvement. So I was mentioning to my colleagues here that this is the exception, that on average, water districts across California actually showed a very good scores in terms of water conservation. Here in Hayward, again, our conservation standard was 8%, and in the last month we actually exceeded it and hit it with 31%. And so the cities really are taking this to heart. Pictures like seeing the governor out, where there should be 5 to 6 feet of snow, is really hitting home with residents, and especially with property owners such as us. So that's just the quick and dirty. I didn't want to go too much into the policy and into the executive order, other than say that 25% is the average that's going across, and you can go to the State Water Resources Control Board at waterboards.ca.gov, again, waterboards, plural, .ca.gov to see what your water district conservation standard is. So with that, we'll be doing questions at the end after Kevin, Mary, and Alejandro have presented. Please type them over to Leela, and we're looking for a very vibrant conversation. We know that webinars such as these with such a large audience are hard to have a conversation, but that is really what we're looking to present and to have. What we're hoping to present is just one example of what we're doing. We hope to inspire as well as to hear your ideas about what's working and what's not working, so that together as a state we can really get through this drought. So I want to introduce Kevin Leitner, again, who is our Associate Director of Real Estate Development. He'll be looking at and presenting our current portfolio and what we're doing here at Eden Housing to address the current properties and how they can go about saving water better. So, Kevin?
Thanks, Nathan. It's very nice to be here today. Even though it happens to be my photo up on this slide, I'm actually part of a core team of 4 developers here working on portfolio projects, plus a small army of consultants that we use to help us reposition our properties. So architects, engineers, landscape architects, Title 24 compliance consultants, just a whole slew of people that help us do what we do every day. I just happen to be the spokesmodel for today. If you think about our portfolio, as Nathan mentioned, we have more than 130 properties, and instead of thinking of them as just suddenly being created and then living their lives in perpetuity, it helps to think of them more as a permanent cycle that requires, substantial refinance and rehabilitation every 15 to 20 years. So in the course of 20 years, all 130 properties would eventually cycle through some kind of major refinance or restructuring event. While the drought is the impetus for today's kind of presentation, the drought doesn't necessarily drive our decision-making entirely about restructuring our properties. What really brings each one to the forefront is the need to refinance them and to comprehensively rehabilitate them. And the drought has just added a new layer of urgency to what we were already doing and a new lens for looking at what we were doing. We're targeting a minimum of 40% water reduction for these portfolio projects, and we're starting to wonder if 40% is even enough, especially if some cities are expected to make overall water cuts of 36%. So it's really our baseline minimum water reduction target that we hand off to all of the people that work on these projects. Most notably and the most easily achievable is in our landscapes. So our landscape architects have marching orders to cut by a minimum of 40%. And on the screen in front of you, we have what our budget starts to look like after 15 to 20 years of service. Something that's a little bit possibly unique among developers, affordable developers are required to only charge a restricted rent for their residents. And generally, we provide free water. So our residents are not necessarily incentivized to save. And so we start to see trend lines like this, where if the red line is expenses for operating our properties, and this is an actual property, and the blue is our rental revenue, they start to cross. So after several years in service, we have an issue. We have to either cut expenses or find some other sort of relief. A major rehabilitation and restructuring allows us to bring in new capital. As affordable developers, we have some sources that are unique to us, including low-income housing tax credits that lets us recapitalize our properties. But then we also have to trim expenses. In this analysis, utilities represented 17% of overall expenses. Water represented more than a third of that. And if we're faced with water district increases of 7%, 9%, I've heard even higher numbers for some districts, we have a serious problem. We're going to have a major operating budget shock, and we're certainly not alone here. Market rate property owners might be able to pass this on to the residents, but we cannot. So we have to find other ways to make these budgets work. We find that in modeling projected water conservation, if we're able to hit that 40% target, that alone improves trending considerably. It buys us another 4 years of financial feasibility just on its own. And with a major restructure, we look at other efficiency measures, including solar photovoltaic, solar thermal, energy efficient lighting, and our energy efficient appliances, retrofitting all of our major mechanical systems. And this package, along with bringing in new capital, allows us to reposition these properties. Specifically for water reduction strategies, but overall for all of the things that we do when we restructure, we have a set of criteria that we use to evaluate whether it's worth it to pursue those measures. We look at how it scales at the property. We look at what we can actually accommodate on the site. If we have a tightly constrained site, for example, if it's completely built out, can we fit something like a gray water filter and tank? Capacity, do we have the wherewithal or the ability to install these measures at the site? We look at the payback period or the return on investment of these measures. Affordable housing is a little bit unique because we do have a subsidized form of equity coming in the form of low-income housing tax credits that may make our modeling a little bit different from market rate developers. We look at overall operating budget improvements. Again, possibly unique to affordable housing finance is that we only get the opportunity to bring in new capital every 15 to 20 years because of that tax credit product. So we have to make sure that for the operating period, we can get through 15 to 20 years without any other major opportunity to bring in new capital. We look at the availability of technology. When I first started in the development world, gray water reuse was fairly unproven. This technology has moved so far forward so quickly that now it's something that should be considered in every new development, and definitely if you're taking on a major rehab. The regulatory environment, when I first started, a lot of municipalities were reluctant to approve laundry gray water reuse systems. So it's a really good example of how the times have changed. Now that we have case studies out there for multifamily properties, they're much more supportive. And in fact, one of the case studies I have coming up in just a couple of slides, the city actually approached us based on the success of a system I had installed previously to install this at the new property. So people are coming around with these new technologies, and it's exciting, and they're actually becoming good advocates for it. And then in terms of financing and incentives, I'm sure a lot of you are aware that water districts are offering rebates. We, in California, have the opportunity to use the property assessment for clean energy, which I'll describe a little bit later. Other utilities are offering on-bill payment, which I think Mary is going to discuss in her section. So things have definitely improved in terms of ways to recruit new capital. And then just kind of looking at this matrix as a way to screen out possible measures. I'll throw a few out there before we leave this slide, and you can kind of consider them. Reducing watering is probably the easiest thing you can do. It scales. Most any site can do it. Has a fast return on investment. Makes immediate impact on operating budgets. There is really no technology except perhaps capping your lines. Regulatory environment. I think the challenges that cities or HOAs might have thrown up a few years ago are pretty much moot now that the government has issued, or the governor has issued his executive order. And financing, it's pennies on the dollar for what you're going to get back. Leak surveys and fixing leaks, resident education, putting locks on hose bibs that are not under your control, capping irrigation spray heads. These are all very, very quick fixes that are low cost. Installing aerators, low flow faucets and shower heads. There are incentives out there that can help to offset those costs. For multifamily property owners, if you lease your laundry machines, it's likely that your vendor will work with you to source machines that meet the new regulations and the new requirements. If you have more money to invest, something that we're looking at now, at all of the properties that are going through a major restructure, is taking lawn out of service and replacing it with native plantings or permeable landscape. Gray water reuse is something that fits in really well with a comprehensive rehab. To meet new codes, we have to open up the walls in most of our laundry rooms when we do a substantial rehab. So it's the perfect time to put in a second set of pipes that flush right out to a gray water system. And a lot of our rehabilitation projects were also opening exterior walls to fix water intrusion issues. So again, that's a golden opportunity to take a pipe straight out of the laundry room to the landscape that's fed by that gray water system. I think a lot of people are excited about the potential of rainwater capture, and if you're already opening up walls and doing other major work at the property, that's an opportunity to look at that. There are challenges, but not insurmountable. And then out on the horizon, I was just in Portland, and I saw a multifamily development in downtown that's actively marketing that they're going to go to black water reuse, so soiled water from toilets and other sources. They're planning to filter on site and reuse on site. So again, the case of technology catching up, and also education of our residents.
And Kevin, I just want to interrupt. There was one question around the graph of where the crossover point is. You just want to speak briefly again to that, to this first graph, and then I can go to the second one, just the crossover point.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. If year 0 is where we are now, this graph shows that by year 5, or actually looks like the yellow line is a little off, year 4, revenue would be overwhelmed by expenses, so the property would technically be in the red. And then just by implementing this 40% water reduction, it gives us a few more years of financial viability. So it pushes out that point where expenses exceed revenue to the 8th year. And again, this is just part of an overall solution for recapitalizing and making changes to the operating budget of the property. So laundry gray water reuse for irrigation is one of the things I'm personally most excited about, and most often fits conveniently into a comprehensive rehabilitation of a property. The systems are fairly simple. They consist of a filtration system. It can either filter based on particle size, and it can feature UV light to kill off bacteriological contamination. This is coming from, of course, laundry that could potentially have other matter in it besides just detergent. There's usually there's always a backflow preventer. There's always a flush out that goes to the sanitary sewer, and then connected to the holding tank. And a lot of our holding tanks are in the 500 to 750 gallon size. Connected to the holding tank are purple irrigation pipes. Purple signifies that it's non-potable water, so not safe for drinking. And when we take those irrigation lines onto the landscape, they're buried. So they're a minimum of 4 to 6 inches below the surface of the soil. They're safe. Water is not going to percolate up. And if there was a leak that caused ponding water, we would shut off the system so that there's no ponding. This prevents human contact, prevents contact with pets, and it is usually covered not only by soil but by a thick layer of mulch and then also vegetation. For the property that we're going to look at, which is 144 units, 2 of these systems will cover the whole property, several acres, all of the irrigated areas. 144 units, so approximately 72 units worth of people using each of the laundry rooms. And we're sizing the system so it has a 750 gallon holding tank. The property in question is in a fairly dry area, Pinole, California, in the East Bay. It's where the San Pablo Bay meets San Francisco Bay. Beautiful site, several acres, and it's on a slope, so the areas that have the most trees kind of to the lower right and the bottom are actually on a pretty steep slope. The blue shaded area represents the entire irrigated area that we can now feed with just gray water. So all of that area that would have been getting drinkable water from the utility district can now be completely switched over to reused water. We have a really fantastic landscape architect working on this project, Steve Arago. He's had a long practice of water conservation landscapes, drought-resistant plants, native plants, and he's also doing a great job of helping us source incentives and rebates that will help to offset the cost of this refurbished landscape. So this is what is existing. There are a lot of mature trees that we're intending to keep. We're going to retrofit the existing main trunk lines of the irrigation systems, but we don't have to replace them, which is going to be a huge cost efficiency. And then we're going to tie in the purple pipes that I mentioned before to these main trunk lines. There's actually going to be a minimum of trenching in this landscape where we do install the new purple lines, we're actually going to be adding, for the most part, sufficient new soil amendment that we're not going to have to trench those either. They'll be buried by new soil that comes in to mitigate another problem there, which is compacted soil. Then everyone always gets very excited by the after, where we've refurbished the play areas. We have a really interesting mix of drought-tolerant plantings. We should be eligible for a $20,000 rebate just for the utility districts for taking out large areas of lawn from service. We're going to irrigate in a smart way. So we're going to have weather meters and soil moisture meters. We have a couple of really interesting capillary action mats that are going to go in under, or sheets, I should say, under the replaced turf that will be much more water efficient. And as I mentioned, we're going to retrofit a lot of the landscape with drought-tolerant and native plants. Sometimes there's still a stigma attached to those, but Steve has developed a planting palette that offers year-round seasonal interest and a lot of curb appeal, which is one thing that's very important to us. As a large property owner, we have to maintain very low vacancy rates and continually release. And one of the things that first attracts residents is that curb appeal. And then in combination with everything else, we'll be doing leak surveys, fixing leaks at the properties, expediting delivery of hot water. So when you run a tap waiting for hot water, we're going to try to mitigate that through a combination of better pipe insulation, recirculating pumps, shortening the distance between the hot water production and the hot water delivery, and in some cases where we have lines that are too long, adding Insta-Hots below sinks and meter showers that can deliver hot water faster so that people aren't just running water. Aerators and low flow devices, which are an easy win for us. And then evaluating what other incentives are available, such as toilet replacement, irrigation retrofit. And this all probably sounds great on a project-by-project basis, but what we're also really looking at is how we scale it to our whole portfolio. It looks like my number is slightly out of date. We have more than 129 properties, but it still gives you a rough order of magnitude. With more than 8,000 units in service, the portfolio team is looking at addressing about a quarter of those over the next 5 years, so more than 2,000 units. And in combination with all of the great work that our property management and asset management divisions are doing, we intend to try to reach every property, but these are the major interventions where we would take on as much as possible. And just a few closing thoughts. One of the major challenges that we face, and that I think any property owner faces, is that these are existing occupied buildings. And so it is an expensive prospect to open up walls, to open up plumbing systems, to retrofit the entire landscape. We work with a really dedicated team of property managers, site staff, and also a team of dedicated consultants. As a property owner, if we are doing major work in units, we have to offer temporary relocation benefits. We have to clearly communicate with our residents the reasons for their temporary displacement. It is a major, major undertaking, and so a lot of those more intensive interventions really only happen when we take on a major rehabilitation. Some of the shortcomings, one of the things I briefly touched on was curb appeal. We're not at the point yet where people are excited about seeing a landscape of cactus and river rocks. Mm-hmm. So we do still have to put in plants that do possibly use a little more water than we'd like to use. We try to focus that impact on curb appeal areas and offset it with greater savings throughout the rest of the landscape. We found that the new fixtures are a lot better at delivering low flow amounts of water and still keeping residents happy. Some of the earlier generations, you could definitely tell that your water flow had been cut, but we're very excited about kind of the newer technologies. And then, of course, money. It's always a challenge. We really try to take advantage of our opportunities to recapitalize the properties to implement this stuff. And to the extent that we can quantify the savings and we feel really good about it, we will try to leverage more from those savings. So, for example, if we're going to offset 40% of water use, and we can really demonstrate that we'll at least get a significant portion of that, then we'll approach our lenders, like our banks, about borrowing more in mortgage because we have those savings. Failures. We haven't had any epic failures yet, but we have a lot of rehabs in the pipeline there, and we'll pretty quickly know what works and what doesn't. And the other mitigating factor for that is the drought and the state mandate to save water have really given us a lot of strong support for change. So cities are now on board with us trimming our landscaping, cutting back on some of those more water-intensive features that they were used to seeing, and planning commissions used to force us to install. And then exciting new possibilities on the horizon. You know, it'll be really interesting to see how those black water reuse systems work, what the lessons learned will be from that, and especially in a high-density area like downtown Portland. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mary.
Yeah. Thank you, Kevin. I guess I'll lend my voice in there to say that there is some curb appeal to River Rock. I was at a property community down in Fremont where we had replaced a portion of the grass with River Rock with some drought-tolerant plants. And there was something very surreal and almost zen-like of how the rocks, I wish I'd taken a picture of it for you, how the rocks imitated water, and how the rocks were coming out of the property, out towards the street, and it actually looked like a riverbed. So to imitate water, I guess sign me up to say that, you know, I was excited when I saw it, and we're excited to show it off. So with that, I want to pass it over to Mary. Mary is our Associate Director of Asset Management. She's been putting together a very exciting pilot program for us to look at some of the hardware in our properties first on a small scale and hopefully to go on a large scale across our portfolio. So without giving away any of the exciting stuff, I'll pass it off to Mary.
Thanks, Nathan. Good afternoon, everybody. Kevin has done a really nice job of discussing the portfolio restructuring. I come from a company that had a very different portfolio that was much more interurban and did not have many outdoor landscaping opportunities to save water. And so I've always been interested very much in what we can do indoors to save water. One of Eden's properties is Victoria Green Apartments. It's in Hercules, California, not far from the property in Knoll that Kevin was presenting about earlier. We were thinking, what can we do to compare different kinds of interventions? And Victoria Green provided a very nice opportunity for reasons that will become clear very soon. Why do we want to do this toilet intervention study? As we know, outdoor water use is controlled entirely by the landlord, but indoor water use, it doesn't depend on gremlins and minions, but on resident behavior. And that's much more difficult for landlords to influence, much less regulate or require. Resident behavior varies by age, by immigration status, by ethnicity, and above all, by personal habits. The aerators and shower heads are very easy for the owner to change, and the conservation you get from that doesn't depend much on resident behavior. Toilets are similar, but also have special features. We wanted to look at how resident behavior and water fixture upgrades interact. We wanted to see if just plain resident education does as good or better as different hardware interventions. And among the hardware interventions, which ones work better and which ones don't work as well. Among your indoor water fixtures, it is the toilets that use the most water of all. This slide shows comparatively how different indoor uses consume water within a home. These figures are taken most likely from nationwide residential buildings, not only multifamily buildings, because you see that the number 3 usage is showers, I'm sorry, the number 2 usage is laundry, and still the number 1 usage is toilets. Whenever possible, whenever the planning department doesn't force our hand in other means, we like to have common laundry rooms. When residents have their own washers and dryers or their own hookups, they can wash 3 shirts and a pair of socks, and the landlord's paying for all the water. We wanted to see, again, how we could intervene to make the biggest difference with the biggest consumer of indoor water. At Victoria Green, there are 132 units total in 17 buildings. Fortunately, there are 8 buildings that are identical. Each of them have 8 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartments. Each of these 8 identical buildings have 1 water meter for the domestic water use inside each building. And we decided to test 3 different toilet interventions, no change on the toilets, as well as resident education. Victoria Green is a property with very, very stable occupancy, and we were able to pay for these hardware interventions with property reserves. For the 32 units where we did installations of some sort or another, it cost a total of $14,500. The first intervention that we installed are dual flush converters. They can be installed by maintenance staff. They cost around $30 each at a place like Home Depot or your other local hardware stores. And they have great potential for saving water without changing resident behavior very much at all. The dual flush converters can be installed into an existing toilet, even on low flow models. Maintenance staff can install one in 30 to 45 minutes, usually decreasing from 45 to 30 minutes with practice after the first 2 go in. 1.6 gallons per flush is the nationwide standards for toilets. With these converters, the solid waste gets 1.6 gallons and the liquid waste gets half of that at 0.8 gallons per flush. At the beginning of this year, California standards for toilets changed so that 1.28 gallons per flush is now our statewide standard for new construction. Dual flush converters can have a few different designs of flush mechanisms, either with 2 buttons or 2 levers. Different mechanisms might have better or not such good reception with different residents. I've heard in some cases that elderly folks and small children sometimes have issues operating the 2-button varieties successfully. I've also heard that some women break their nails on the button-style flushers. And maybe for this reason, the lever-style converters might be the ones you choose, but do a test first. This is the maintenance staff person at Victoria Green installing the dual flush converter into one of the existing toilets. It gets installed, calibrated, and tested to make sure it's working according to the manufacturer's directions. These were installed in late November of last year, right around Thanksgiving. The second hardware intervention that we undertook in 2 of the buildings at Victoria Green are very low flow single flush toilets, the 1.28 gallon per flush models that are now California standards. These were installed just after New Year's by an outside vendor. In late January, we also had another 2 buildings worth of dual flush toilets installed, again by an outside vendor. And like the dual flush converters, these toilets use 0.8 gallons per flush for liquid waste and 1.6 gallons per flush for solid waste. When vendors install these, it comes with a guarantee, which helps landlords sleep easily at night, and it allows our maintenance staff to do other important work around the property instead. As I said earlier, we also want to test resident education interventions. Every resident who had changes in their toilets were instructed on how to use them. And then later on, we went back and helped do conservation education at half of the buildings. We wanted to see if this education was as or more effective as the toilet intervention, and this was conducted in April. So there was a lag. We couldn't do everything all at once, but we've done it all so far. 2 of the buildings had no toilet changes. This is the test matrix that I would keep in my mind. The columns are the different kind of interventions. First, the dual flush converters put in November, the very low flow single flush toilets installed in early January, the dual flush toilets in late January, and then no intervention for 2 buildings. For the top grid in the matrix, residents in those buildings did participate in water conservation education, and in the bottom tier of buildings, the residents did not have additional education around water conservation. We want to see the results in all squares of this matrix. We have preliminary results. Our billing cycles with the East Bay Municipal Utility District is every 2 months. We got 3 before and after billing cycles for the dual flush converters and for the buildings with no intervention, and 2 billing cycles before and after installation for the dual flush toilets and the single flush toilets. The water in gallons saved is listed just after that, which ranged from just over 20,000 gallons in the single flush buildings to over 228,000 gallons in the converted buildings. But the data was a little bit funky. You do see that in the buildings with no interventions, it looks like the residents consumed a whole lot more water, and I don't have any reason to doubt that. However, for some of these billing cycles, there's kind of funky data, particularly in the single flush buildings. We're looking at a total of 4 billing cycles, 2 before the installation of the new toilets and 2 after. In one building, there were 3 of the 4 billing cycles examined that had the exact same number of gallons consumed, which is very highly unlikely result. We do know that the water district is not always able to actually send out a person and read the water meters every single billing cycle. So they, upon occasion, might bill you the same number of gallons that they billed you last time and then adjust it down the road. And this pretty clearly did happen for one of these 2 single flush buildings. Nevertheless, these are our preliminary results. It looks like the buildings with the converters saved water in excess of 1/3. The dual flush toilet buildings saved 30%, the single flush 5%, and the buildings with no intervention, their consumption went up. In late April, we did resident water conservation with residents in 4 buildings, the ones at the top of the matrix that I showed you a few slides ago. Since we get water bills only every 2 months, it's still too early to tell real results. Once we have a full year of before and after billings to compare, then we'll get a better sense of how much of an impact the resident education has had, as well as the toilet intervention. One initial glance for the buildings that did have the most participants in resident education, and that happened to be the buildings with the dual flush toilet. It looks like there is a possibility of saving an additional 10 to 15% in water consumption over simply having a toilet change. Stay tuned and we'll come back to you in a year and report on some more results. So what makes the most sense for landlords? Where can we save most water and save most money? The results that we're presenting in the Eden pilot project are in gallons, not in dollars. Part of that is because water rates vary by district, as well as drought surcharges. In July, we started to get surcharges at all of our districts to deal with the drought. The water districts don't actually pay for the water that goes into the pipe at the beginning. They are a water delivery service. And since they charge by volume, when all the customers start cutting back their consumption, it doesn't change the operating costs of the water district very much, and they actually need to either raise rates or install surcharges, which has happened. When we look at the different costs of the interventions that we undertook, this is what they were. The dual flush converters cost $33 per toilet. The dual flush toilets were $480 each installed, and the very low flow single flush toilets were $394 each. With this information, we might be thinking, where is it that we want to focus our efforts, or where would you like to focus your efforts? First of all, find out what your before consumption is. Eden last year got all of our properties included in an utility management system that provides the billing data from their website, which I used to download the results for this pilot project. And it gave us a baseline for where they were at before any of the installations happened. If you choose to do a pilot project at your property or properties, test out a few interventions first before jumping in all the way. Another idea that we would like to explore when we have the resources, the time, and hopefully the incentives is submetering. Kevin didn't mention too much, but as affordable housing owners, we can charge rent to our residents, but we really can't pass on other costs. So if we are able to submeter a property that's currently master metered for water, it's going to be kind of tricky for us as the middle person to turn around and charge the residents for their own water consumption. Since we have this utility management system, and in a couple of properties we do have individually metered water by apartment, at those properties we can charge the residents for their water consumption. Nevertheless, our leases do include clauses that if the residents are being excessively wasteful, then we can ding them for that. And if we are able to install sub-meters or water bracelets, that could give us the tool to do so. That then brings its own monitoring challenges. How are we going to get the data? We don't want to send our maintenance people around to read meters every month or every 2 months. Are there internet connections to monitor this? Who's going to be watching it? Is the data downloadable into a billable format to pass on to the residents? All of these are questions that we might face in the future. Kevin mentioned that some water districts are providing incentives to various degrees and even on-bill financing. I'm very happy that the City of Hayward, which does have its own water company, is restarting a pilot program of their own called Hayward Pays, Pay As You Save, where the city will pay for the water and energy retrofit measures that are installed, and you pay it back with a portion of your water savings. So for instance, if your water bill is $3,000, if you're going to save $3,000 a month on your city water bill, and you do these upgrades, then in this program, the city will keep $1,000 of the savings to pay back for the measures that they underwrote for installation, and the landlord gets to keep the other $2,000, just as an example. So see if the water districts where your properties are or your companies are located have opportunities like this. It's really a nice option to have. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Mary. I didn't know what the term toilet intervention was before I came here to Eden Housing. I think we all know a lot about it, more than we ever thought. It is nice to see that the preliminary results are leaning towards the low-cost option of not having to replace all toilets, but to instead just install a converter. There is some interesting points that you mentioned, especially the last point of sub-metering, and how we are now living in a dynamic world as it relates to the drought in some jurisdictions and counties. we're finding that new developments are actually required to put in individual meters per unit, which is great in terms of a data collection standpoint, but in terms of development costs, that depending on the size of the building can be upwards to additional $1 million, and where our margins are already very thin, that is making certain projects not pencil any further. So it is dynamic, and as we try to stay on top of it, there are things that we know the team is thinking about. So thank you, Mary. I'm sure there are a number of questions around toilet interventions that we'll address after Alejandro gets there. But with that, I want to introduce Alejandro Oropeza. He's our facilities manager. He oversees all of Eden Housing's portfolio, the maintenance for the long term, as well as the life expectancy for the infrastructure and systems. Alejandro joined us in 2012. So Alejandro.
Thank you very much. Again, I'm reminded on what great company I work for with Eden Housing here, with Mary, with Kevin commenting, with Nathan as well. I'm fortunate to be working for such a great organization that really looks towards the long-term asset management of a building as opposed to just short-term and only addressing something when it breaks. Property management has many dimensions to it. I'm going to be speaking about the facilities and the maintenance side of it. Kevin's already talked about, with very great detail, on the importance of a property to be able to maintain itself financially and how that establishes a successful structure to provide affordable housing in our industry. Again, most of my comments here are going to be based from an affordable housing standpoint. When we're brainstorming for long-term solutions versus routine habits, that really comes with a challenge. By nature, we're creatures of habit. We focus on our daily efforts and our daily routines. Typically, if something isn't broken, isn't on fire, we don't really worry about it too much. It's only when we're challenged when we do our best work. And this is a perfect example with Governor Brown basically laying down the law and having management companies look at their entire portfolio. Whereas before, we were going about in our daily business making sure that our properties were sustainable. It really takes a conscious effort to brainstorm and to consider long-term solutions. First, we must understand our investment. Is it a short-term or long-term? In our case, it's a long-term investment that we're really looking for and focusing on. Too many times, we only focus on what's in front of us. We fail to scan the horizon, as Kevin mentioned earlier. Typically, it's only when we're challenged that we start to think outside of the box. Alternative solutions don't come easy, as again, we're creatures of habit. When we're challenged in this way, we're able to really produce and brainstorm new ideas that provide long-term solutions. Designing for a drought. Well, it's no different than preparing for a fire or for an earthquake. We must consider many aspects. The first one, development. Let's roll back to time before the building was built, when the planning phase was in part. Data acquisition also plays a key role in current structures. Facilities does play a role in the development of new sites and in rehabs. However, our bread and butter really comes from managing existing buildings and foreseeing future failures that could be prevented. As Mary commented earlier, when you have data, you're able to establish base points. You're able to, from those base points, you're able to plan accordingly and strategically place your resources towards what's going to make the biggest bang. What are you going to get in value from your hard work? Architectural landscaping is a perfect example of this. In the past, when times were good, architects just really cared about establishing a great curb appeal, getting that picture, placing it in their office, and moving on to the next project. leaving the management staff responsible for the long-term upkeep of their buildings. I'll get into an example of this with one of our existing properties. As Kevin mentioned as well, with these new challenges, architects again are challenged with reducing their water costs within their landscape design. And for the most part, this really has been embraced with systems such as gray and black water recycling usage. In addition, the rain recycling program is really going to change the dynamics of facilities and maintenance management. Here, you see one of our properties, Downtown River in Petaluma. Looks great, beautiful waterfront property, so on and so forth. However, for facilities, this paints a whole different picture. How does facilities use this building? Well, we'll get into greater detail, but for now, when you look at this property, besides its aesthetic value and curb appeal, which does have bearing on retaining our residents, we also must provide sustainability to this structure. Here you'll see an example drawn out. Trees are planted very beautifully around the building, around the footprint of the building to be exact. However, these trees will mature. What is this going to do? Well, as you guys know, all underground plumbing is underground. When these trees start to mature, you will see that they will cause havoc in either creating stress points in supply lines, or the rooting system will infiltrate the drainage, which will cause backups. And in this property, that's what we're plagued with. We're plagued with backups because of the rooting systems. These trees now have matured to the point where the top of the tree line is actually to the top of the roof line. That's how much they've matured from this picture here. I'm working with Kevin, and we're really looking at how we implement design into our structure. Another example of this is identifying our trench lines in order not to plant trees that have large rooting systems, in order to minimize any infiltration into our plumbing or draining lines. We're not going to 100% avoid it, but we can surely minimize it. In addition to the tree line, you also still have a lawn. Again, back in the days, this really wasn't much of a concern. However, with today's new challenges of water conservation, we must consider alternative solutions. Very soon, at this specific property, we will have drought-resistant plantage and vegetation around the perimeter of the building, which will provide a different dynamic. It will continue to provide curb appeal, but again, it will really reduce the irrigation costs to maintain this specific building and many others like it in our portfolio. On the average, it takes approximately 0.623 gallons of water to irrigate 1 square foot of lawn. This equals to 62 gallons of water by a 10 by 10 area. 10 by 10 area is not large at all, and you can see the water consumption that it takes. Typically, your typical lawn will need to be irrigated 3 times a week, with the amount equaling to 1 inch of water. That's what a healthy lawn would need, besides other medicines and other, so what I'm looking for, care and things of that nature. But as you can see, by reducing the lawn square footage, how much water we're going to consume versus how much water we're going to save by implementing drought-resistant plant and vegetation. For the long term, maintenance costs will also help drive the budgets for our properties. Saving water on an exterior approach has a lot of parallels to it. One of those parallels is that we're going to be able to save costs on siding, water intrusion, as Kevin mentioned earlier when we're considering rehabs. It's also going to save maintenance costs from a maintenance staff focusing more on your typical work orders as opposed to chasing down broken sprinkler heads caused by rodents, caused by typical play, or just by the age of the system. Thank you for that, sir. All of this places a drop in that income bracket that Kevin talks about. We must consider what the cost is going to be to implement these systems on the front end, but also we cannot disregard the long-term savings. Conventional property management views their properties slightly different than nonprofits. We really understand the value of spending $1 now for a savings of $20 in the long term. Again, many factors must be considered. One of those, again, to Mary's point, is reducing the cost of water consumption by simply replacing the flushing mechanism. Again, ideally, you would like to replace a toilet, but realistically, when we're looking at long-term solutions, this does play a part into saving the property, the resources, in order to focus on what's needed the most. Another point that this will provide is that it reduces the inspection time. There's less work orders on the exterior, and the maintenance that will be able to focus on the interior work orders that really service our residents, as opposed to consuming the valuable hours that they have on the job site in an exterior fashion.
Great. Well, thank you, Alejandro. I think it helps us conceptualize what some of the benefits are as we move forward from a maintenance and facilities standpoint. I think you also touched upon how we design and how we think going forward, so not just for our current portfolio, but also how we design our future developments and some of the unforeseen benefits that come out of it, such as less dry rot in the future, less time for maintenance because of water damage. So not only are we not wasting water, but we're also not reaping the downsides of over water usage. So I am going to pause here for questions. Again, we did want a good conversation around this, ideas and examples of folks on the webinar of what you're doing and responding. The challenge that we have around this table is that when we first conceptualized this webinar, we thought we would give all the standout examples we had of how we are ahead of the curve, how we are around water conservation, and then the game changed in April and May when new standards came out, where we found out we were now just meeting the curve. We were no longer ahead of it. So it does present its challenges, but it also is a great opportunity going forward. We really do feel that we can be leaders around water conservation because we are multifamily apartment and buildings going forward. So,
Nathan, if I may comment on leadership, I meant to bring this in my discussion point. The leadership portion plays a key role here. Sometimes there's a big disconnect between upper management or landowners, property owners, and the disconnect comes with that of their on-site management staff. The on-site management staff, in our case, has received tremendous support from their leaders, from upper management, from asset management, from development, from facilities. In addition to this, we also, as leaders, provide education, training, and help them understand that the property manager and the boots on the ground, the maintenance staff, are really the key drivers to water conservation. We, as leaders and managers, can only do so much and push the envelope and push projects down the line, but if they're not being executed in an effective manner, we're not going to see the cost savings that we expected. So I just want to drive that leadership element to the ground, that it takes a collaborative effort between management and the owners of the property to really approach this in a systematic and efficient way.
Thank you, Alejandro. I definitely did want to mention that here at Eden Housing, we brought together all of our staff, which, as you know from the map, can be quite the task to bring all 300 plus employees together. But we did have a water saving day where we went through much of the same information that we went through today. But we also committed as an organization, as a company, that we would beat any of the conservation standards by at least 5%. So, for example, here in Hayward, the standard is 8%. So for all of our Hayward properties, we would commit to 13%. As you can tell, the city is doing the same, even more with the 31% last month savings that were had. But The hardware, the various design aspects, drought tolerant, great water, all those things must be coupled with resident education. Mary didn't mention, but because of our water day, that is probably going to skew her results around resident education versus no resident education, but that's okay. The purpose is to save water and not necessarily have it to be the perfect scientific study, but we are moving towards that. We are very excited. So, Leela, I guess we'll open it up to questions. I did see one question that was typed to us, but I'll let you ask additional questions to the group here. But the first question was around the brand of the toilet that was used, and if we don't have that information, we can forward it to you. So I'm seeing that we don't have that at hand right now, so we will get the brand of the various ones to Alejandro.
Yes, I did work with Mary on the front end of this project, and we try to do what we can with our available resources. We look into various types. We really don't want to advocate one brand or the other, as your results may differ. However, I will encourage you to do your research as to longevity and warranty and weigh that against the cost. Our toilet that we selected, actually we selected two different types of toilets because we wanted to see which one will work best in our interest in the long term. We're also going to reach out to the manufacturer that we feel will work best in our interest and discuss bulk purchasing. But the toilets that we found, you can find them in your local Home Depot, Orchard Supply, hardware store. They're nothing extravagant. They're very economical, very durable. We did select a toilet that was a single piece as opposed to a dual piece toilet with a water reservoir. This reduces the maintenance cost overall, but it does, again, cost a little more on the front end, but we do our best to weigh out the differences for our applications. If you really wanted to know which toilets we install, feel free to email Nathan, and we will get you that information. Again, we're not advocating or recommending one toilet over the other. All toilets are governed by the 1.28 gallons per flush anyhow.
And we did bid out the installation work and got bids from 3 different vendors before selecting one. And they might not all have provided us with the exact same toilet make and model.
Great. And then, again, with the resident education, our property managers and our resident services coordinators have met with all of our properties and with all the residents to talk about how they can be saving water. I know that we've heard it in the news and whatnot, but with the hot water delivery, trying to recapture that water, not let it go down the sink, but using it for watering plants as you wait for that water to heat up and for other uses. I know there's a wealth of resources out there, both from the water districts as well as from the news, which again will probably skew the study, but that's okay. So we'll wait for other questions. There was one question to Kevin around the black water project. I think that's novel, that's innovative. Might be even a little bit scary for some folks to hear, but we'll speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, I don't know a huge amount about it. It's a project called Hasselo on 8th in Portland. It looks to me like there are a few buildings involved in the development, and then one of the buildings is going to take all of the black water and put it through a couple of biofilters, essentially almost like bioswales, and then use the resulting treated water to take care of irrigation for the whole site. And the way the marketing materials have been developed, it looks like they're charging a premium for the units in that building for people who want to be particularly eco-conscious. But again, that's Hasselo on 8th in Portland, and they call their biofiltration system NORM. That's an acronym, so NORM. So I encourage you to look it up. I'm very curious. I think for us, there are kind of limited applications until it's more proven technology, but at least people are trying to make it work.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and put my email address on here so that folks can see that if you are too shy to ask a question during the webinar, that's okay. Feel free to direct questions directly to me, and I'll be sure to get it out to our panelists here to answer your questions. Yes.
It looks like we have a few more questions, and we have about 10 minutes left on this webinar. So if folks can stay on to hear the remaining answers, please do, because I know it's really great information. We've received a lot of good feedback so far. So one question is, have you considered recirculating showers, urine diverting composting toilets, or rainwater capture and UV treatment, et cetera, these type of approaches that reduce the amount of water down to a sustainable rate of 10 gallons per person per day?
Let me address the rainwater capture. Eden Housing is a member of HUD and the Department of Energy's Better Buildings Challenge on the multifamily side. We're also a member of the Water Pilot subgroup, and we're in the midst of an assessment that we got special technical assistance for to evaluate our portfolio for potential rainwater reuse opportunities. We're looking at both rainwater to landscape and rainwater to laundry. So we're, again, at the beginning part of that, and we hope to have 10 or 11 sites where we know what it would cost for us to install a rainwater reuse system at those locations for either laundry or landscape use. The composting toilets, no, we've not looked into that. In asset management, what we concern ourselves with are the properties in operation, and it's tremendously more difficult to go backwards and retrofit plumbing than to do it at the front end. So some of the opportunities out there are much more appropriate to newly built properties than to retrofitting existing occupied ones.
Great. And just this, Nathan, on the rainwater recapture, I know that in some jurisdictions that aren't getting rain, that it doesn't make sense to spend the money to capture what's not falling. I did want to point folks on the webinar to a resource on the Eden Housing website. Our most recent podcast was with former president and current board member of East Bay MUD, that's the East Bay Municipal Utilities District, who is our water district out in Contra Costa County. He provided a riveting 25 minutes around what's happening in Contra Costa County, as well as talking about what's going on in the North Bay up in the Marin County. That while we talk about drought across the board and generalizing around uses, Marin County actually is almost back to normal water in terms of their reservoir. They get their water from reservoirs. They had a very rainy season. So for the current season, they're back to where they are. They aren't affected as much as the snowpack. So while we speak in generalizations, there are jurisdictions that are getting a good amount of rain, so that it does make sense to look at a lot of these systems.
Great, awesome. Thank you. We have another question. We actually have a few questions. So how have toilet conversion kits worked? Were there problems such as breaking or confusion on the tenant's part?
Thank you. We've kept in contact with the site staff. The tenants have had no complaints about it and no confusions about how it's used. Of the 16 converters installed, 5 of them did have to be replaced within 2 to 3 months, but it was under warranty, so the replacements came back and got reinstalled quickly.
And I'd like to add one additional comment to this, is when we discussed that we had a series of units that did not receive resident education, that was a placebo effect. We purposely did this not to see what would happen, but to gauge our resident outreach. If we would have seen very little difference in the units that we did reach out to those units that we had nothing, that we provided no resident education piece, that would have been a red flag to us to enhance our resident outreach program. So we purposely left that out as a placebo effect in order to guide or gauge our efforts and find improvements where we could potentially see some further gains.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Another question, a little bit off topic of toilets, but what utility management program do you use?
We use Conservice.
Okay, great. And then another question we have is, speaking as the audience member, I know in the past there were some issues, at least I remember with the city of San Francisco a few years ago, with using bleach to deal with smell from low-flow toilets. Do these issues or problems still persist?
Well, the smell really doesn't come from the low-flow toilets, as there is a P-trap. Again, we don't advocate any type of chemical treatment, as you know, we're not hygienists or doctors, but in our experience, we have not had any concerns or issues or reports of foul odors coming from the toilets that we modified or serviced.
That's right.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And so just as a clarification to the previous question regarding low-flow toilets, to steering clear of brands, do you guys have experience with .08 flush toilets?
Not yet.
No, and newer construction, this really isn't the challenge because the buildings are designed. We must remember that we're also trying to manage buildings that are 30, 40, 50 years plus. And those are, we found, the biggest challenge with low-flow conversions, as a lot of these buildings have cast iron as opposed to ABS, which cast iron poses greater friction, surface friction, when you flush. And those properties, the minimum we've been able to successfully improve on is 1.28. We've tried lesser, but to no success.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. So it looks like we're at the end of our questions at the moment. Nathan, I'm going to take controls back from you to just do a little bit of the outro for anyone who's a property manager in our audience, as well as some upcoming trainings that we do have. Take that back now. So if you do have any questions, please continue to submit them. As I've let some folks know that if we have any questions we can't address during the live version of this webinar, I'll ask our presenters afterwards and have them follow up with us in the follow-up email. So please keep submitting those. I know that this is a great presentation and a lot of good information. So as they come up, please continually submit those questions. For multifamily property owners and managers like some of you in our audience, the Energy Network Multifamily Program is a fantastic resource. It provides significant rebates and technical assistance to help you complete energy and water upgrades to your buildings. This program offers rebates for windows, lighting, HVAC, appliances, water fixtures, and much more, up to $1,200 per unit. Benefits include lowering operating costs, increasing property value, improving tenant retention, which is always important to property owners. You can learn more by visiting theenergynetwork.com or giving us a call at 949-264-2062. In addition, this webinar series is being co-sponsored by Greenpoint Rated, the leading green home certification system in California with more than 31,000 homes certified, including multifamily properties. Greenpoint Rated is a simple, affordable, and flexible rating system used by countless builders and developers. It assures residents that a building is healthier, more comfortable, durable, and resource efficient. The Greenpoint Rated team is comprised of leading green home experts and set the agenda for which sustainability topics are most relevant to multifamily developers and managers and builders like you in the audience. By visiting buildagreen.org/greenpointrated, you'll find a multifamily checklist to see what kinds of upgrades are also factored into a Greenpoint Rated certification. As always, there are additional educational opportunities such as workshops, webinars, and trainings for you to learn more about energy and resource efficient upgrades. This includes an upcoming webinar on Fannie Mae's Green Initiative, innovative financing options for multifamily properties. That's going to be happening August 20th. You can register by using this link and also find out more information about the webinar through this link here. Again, we have some questions that are coming in, but I want to be respectful of the audience time and our presenters' time, as this webinar has about a minute left. So please keep the questions coming in. I'll follow up with all of our presenters after the conclusion of this webinar. If you have any questions about the multifamily program specifically, you can contact David Myers, our Southern California Regional Director. Here is his phone number and his email on the screen, as well as Jonathan Austin, our Multifamily Sales and Outreach Program Manager. His email and phone number are also listed on the screen. They'll be able to answer any questions you have about the Energy Network Multifamily Program. I would like to just thank our presenters from Eden Housing. Nathan, you were great. Kevin, you were great. Mary, you were great. And Alejandro, great information. I think just by the number of questions we had really spoke to that. It was great having you guys as experts to be able to deliver this content to our audience. Everyone in the audience, thank you for joining us. Presenters, thank you for being with us today. We really appreciate it, and we will see you guys all next time.